Here, you can speak from here if you prefer. You can speak from there.
Yeah.
And if the Q&A, you can sit down if you like. Good morning. I'm Lee Hamilton, the president of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Directors Forum with H.E. Adnan Pachachi. I also want to take a moment to recognize the Iraqi ambassador to the United States who's with us, Mr. Samir Samadai, and he is certainly welcome. There is no issue in the world today that demands more frank and open dialogue than Iraq. How can we describe the U.S. domestic discourse on Iraq? It is shallow. It is narrow in focus. The war is receiving less and less attention, overshadowed by many other issues. And of course, in this country, our discourse is highly partisan. There is no unity of effort. In this environment, we are extremely fortunate today to have Dr. Adnan Pachachi with us. He will enrich our understanding of the current situation in Iraq and the country's future. He is currently a member of the Iraqi Parliament, head of the Iraqi Independent Democrats Party, a leader of the Iraqi List coalition of parties, but these are just the most recent positions he has held in an extraordinary lifetime of dedicated public service. Dr. Pachachi served as Iraq's Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1965 to 1967. He served as Iraq's permanent representative to the United Nations on 2 occasions for a total of 9 years, prior to his exile during the Ba'athist rule. From 1970 to 2003, Abu Dhabi was a great beneficiary of his knowledge and many talents. He held several cabinet posts. He was an advisor to the late President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Zayed, who oversaw, of course, Abu Dhabi's remarkable economic growth and development. Dr. Pachachi helped draft the 1971 interim constitution of the UAE, which became permanent in 1996. In 2003, Dr. Pachachi returned to Iraq to help rebuild the country. 2003-2004, he was a member of the presidency of the Iraqi Governing Council, chaired the drafting committee for the interim constitution. He is, as you know, no stranger to Washington, D.C. He received his Ph.D. in political science from Georgetown University. Dr. Pachachi, we are delighted to have you in Washington and at the Wilson Center, and we now look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for your kind words of introduction and your generous references to me. I'm very happy and honored to address this distinguished gathering at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Of course, you are very well known in Iraq, having co-chaired the study group, which of course evoked a great deal of interest in the country, and your recommendations and your idea have been extremely well received in Iraq, and a lot of what you have said really is now being probably put in practice. So your trip to Iraq has been most beneficial to us Iraqis. Mr. Hamilton, ladies and gentlemen, I left Baghdad less than a week ago. I can confirm that the the security situation has improved somewhat. The violence in Basra and Mosul has subsided. The provinces of Anbar and Salah ad-Din, as well as some areas in Baghdad, have been pacified. But overall, security in Iraq is still fragile and precarious. As evidenced by recent heavy fighting in Sadr city in eastern Baghdad and persistent violence and lawlessness in Kirkuk and Diyala and some areas in the south and north of the country. Even in the pacified regions, there is anxiety and fear that the violence may erupt again, because the militias still have their weapons and their infrastructure remains intact. What is obviously needed is to dispel these fears and anxieties, is the creation of a professionally reorganized security forces owing total allegiance to the state and not hampered by divided loyalties and sectarian affiliations. This can be done only by a government that owes nothing to the militias and armed groups. Such a government can come to power only through free and honest elections. Now is a propitious time for change. Change. And I mean change in Iraq, not in the United States. There is widespread discontent in the country, anger and frustration at the failure of the government to deal effectively with Iraq's economic and social problems. High unemployment persists. Agricultural production has fallen to new lows. The oil industry's urgent need for modernization has been largely ignored. Important infrastructure projects lag behind. And in spite of the availability of billions of dollars, essential services are dismally inadequate, including electricity, housing, clean water, decent schools, and hospitals. Pervasive corruption and a spoiled system, which is perhaps the worst in the world, have undermined all efforts to improve the economy. To meet these challenges, a broadly based, non-sectarian political front has been recently established in Baghdad, specifically to contest the forthcoming elections. It includes several political parties, civil society organizations, tribal leaders, moderate religious figures, professional unions, and independent personalities. They have all joined forces to challenge the sectarian parties that have governed the country during the last 3 years. The electoral platform of the front will include the following principal aims. 1. Ending foreign interference in Iraq's internal affairs, especially Iran's persistent efforts to spread its influence. 2. Rejection of political sectarianism, which has plagued Iraqi society in unprecedented proportions over the last 3 years, and building on Iraq's historic pre-Saddam traditions of amity and cohesion amongst the various confessions and nationalities. 3, purging and reorganizing along professional lines the armed and security services to ensure their undivided loyalty and allegiance to the Iraqi state, thereby reversing the heavy infiltration of these forces by militias, political parties, and even terrorist groups. 4, national reconciliation, which will enable every citizen not implicated in crimes to take part in the political, economic, and social life of the country. 5, restoration of the integrity, independence, and impartiality of the judiciary. And 6, dealing with problems arising from the displacement of millions of Iraqis and finding ways to encourage displaced persons to return so that regions of the country which have been ethnically cleansed can return to their former natural state. To meet these challenges, the Iraqi parliament is at present considering measures to ensure that the upcoming elections are clean. These measures include the enactment of an uncomplicated electoral law enabling the largest number of citizens to participate freely and safely in the elections. Neutral forces to ensure peace and prevent intimidation, supported by effective international supervision of the entire electoral process. Without these safeguards, the elections will have little meaning. A non-sectarian government that we hope will be elected will need the assistance of the multinational forces to maintain law and order in the country, especially during the first critical months after its assumption of power. A major task of the multinational forces would be to help the government to clean up the security forces from militias and armed groups that are known to have close relations with some regional powers, particularly Iran. The multinational forces will have a pivotal role in ensuring the survival of Iraq as a viable state. A heated debate is going on now in Iraq about the future of the multinational forces. Should their mandate be extended, or should it be terminated at the end of this year and be replaced by United States forces in accordance with a negotiated agreement between Iraq and the United States? It is not likely that such an agreement can be concluded and ratified by the Iraqi parliament during the next 6 months. There is strong opposition, I must say, in Iraq to a long-term agreement with the United States, but very wide support for the presence of U.S. troops in the short and intermediate terms, because the majority of Iraqis fear that large-scale reduction of U.S. troops in the near future may plunge the country into chaos and anarchy. There is strong opposition in Iraq because regarding the maintenance of bases, because it is felt that while Iraq is dependent on the United States for its internal security, and under what many in Iraq and and the neighboring countries consider de facto occupation, it would be unwise for the Iraqi government to commit itself now on such a far-reaching matter of importance. May I also say that the United Nations has a role to play in Iraq, even after the termination of the mandate of the multinational forces, because the UN is uniquely placed to serve as a catalyst for reconciliation within Iraq and as a facilitator of multilateral diplomacy between Iraq and the United States and regional powers, including Iran and Syria. With a new administration in Washington and a still relatively new Secretary General of the United Nations, there may be diplomatic opportunities to be seized early next year. In conclusion, let me say this. I believe and hope that the forthcoming elections will usher a new period in Iraq and bring us nearer to the establishment of a liberal, non-sectarian democracy. I may be over-optimistic and even guilty of wishful thinking, but no matter what happens in the elections, our efforts will continue to rid Iraq of all vestiges of political sectarianism. Ours is an ancient land with a young and vigorous population. It has survived upheavals and misfortunes, but I have no doubt it will be able to rise again, thanks to the resiliency of its people and their indomitable spirit. Thank you.
Dr. Pachachi will entertain questions for a few minutes at least. We thank him for his insightful comments about Iraq and constructive comments. Are there questions from the audience? All right, we'll start here. Maria. Okay.
Dr. Pachachi, welcome to Washington. It's nice to see you, and thank you very much for your remarks. I'm very interested in what you're saying about a non-sectarian, more liberal front. But I wonder if you could spell out for us the political strategy, the tactics by which you and others would hope to win these forthcoming elections, because it didn't go in that direction in 1905. And you refer to elections. There are going to be forthcoming provincial elections and also presumably 2009 elections. It's not clear to me whether you're referring to both. Both. And how is the Parliament considering restructuring this whole proportional representation, single list system, so as to make it a little bit more fluid in the election?
Thank you. Let me answer the last question first. Many proposals are before Parliament at present about the way how the lists, the electoral lists, should be presented. There are the so-called open lists, and there are, of course, the closed lists. I think what we are going to have is perhaps a combination of the two. In other words, people can vote for a list, but they have the right to choose whoever they want from that list, without being bound by the order of precedence that these lists have. Your first question was regarding the...
a strategy that you, in your front, which is presumably more liberal, non-sectarian, etc., what sort of election strategy?
Well, yes. what encourages us really is that there's a great deal of discontent. There has been a powerful backlash at the failure of the Iraqi government, which is controlled by sectarian parties, really to deal with the basic problems of Iraq. There is a perception, a very widely held perception, that these parties have failed. They have failed the promises they have given to the voters who elected them in the last election. And there has been a great deal of disappointment. And I think that's why there is a really strong desire for change. And we hope to make use, to exploit this desire for change in our electoral campaign. And, but as you know, in politics, nothing is certain. And of course, we hope to win, but if we don't win, we have to go and continue again and again, because there is no other way. As far as Iraq is concerned, the only way to change things is through democratic means, through elections. The days of military coup d'etats and strong men ruling the country are finished and over.
There's a question in the back, Maria Stella.
Dr. Pachachi, many people in the United States, including people in Washington, think that this war in Iraq was totally unnecessary. They call it stupid. They regret the entry of the United States into Iraq. They regret the occupation and so on. If you can give us a common Iraqi view about that situation, the fact that the United States is occupying Iraq, what do you think that the common Iraqi citizen would prefer, to have Saddam Hussein still in power or to have the United States there? And secondly, there's another issue that sometimes people are toying around in the United States, is this division of Iraq to Shiite Iraq and Sunni Iraq. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, there are different points of view regarding the origin of the war and whether it should have been launched or not. But let me tell you something, that most Iraqis are not concerned with this anymore. They'd rather leave this to the historians to see whether the war was justified or not, whether it was legal or illegal. The fact is that the war happened. The country was occupied by a multinational force. And what Iraqis are concerned with now is to improve the quality of life of the people and to really finally evolve towards a democracy that will protect them from from oppressive governments, a democracy that will be based on the full respect for human rights. So I personally, I don't want to go into an argument about whether the war should have happened or not. It happened, unfortunately. I personally was against the war at the beginning, but once it happened, it was our duty really to try to salvage whatever we could from the situation so that Iraq can continue progressing towards a better future.
And he asked about the division of Iraq into Sunni and Shiite.
No, I think this is an artificial division because, you know, there are so many tribes in Iraq who are half Sunni and half Shiite. There has been so much intermarriage between Sunnis and Shiites. And actually the fighting that is going on at present is mostly between Shiites and Sunnis and Sunnis. But very rarely, I think this is something that should be remembered, very rarely you had Sunni militia fighting against the Shia militia. Never happened. But among the Shias there is fighting, among the Sunnis there is fighting. So this idea of dividing Iraq into Shias and Sunnis is an artificial one, really.
A question here. And then a question in the very back afterwards, Maria Stella.
Hi, my name is Tamam Al-Barazi from Al-Watan Al-Arabi magazine. Dr. Pachachi, how can you erase the control of Iran, I mean, through its proxies, the sectarian parties? I mean, we see United States almost recognizing that influence, Iranian influence by the dialogue with Iran, even Iran now refusing to have a dialogue with the United States on this issue. I mean, how can you rescind this influence and this, especially, you know, the sectarian party are taking over the country? I mean,
well, the dialogue really between the United States and Iran has been confined to matters of security and the control of the frontiers between Iraq and Iran and the flow of weapons and other forms of assistance from Iran to some of the parties and militias in Iraq. We are, of course, against interference by any country in our internal affairs. And it has been shown conclusively that Iran has been helping at a really massive scale, money and weapons and arms and training to various militias in Iraq. And they have people who have infiltrated the security services in Iraq, who have infiltrated the intelligence services in Iraq. And that's why it is a matter of utmost importance and the top priority for any government in Iraq to really start the job of cleaning up these services and the forces from the infiltration of foreign elements.
And then we'll go over here. Lauren.
Dave Ottaway, I'm a senior fellow here at the center. The Army seems to be operating better than the police, particularly more recently. And I'm curious to what extent the former Sunni officers have been reintegrated into the Army, and to what extent you feel the Army is becoming more an integrating force for the country.
Well, it is true that the police has been more heavily infiltrated than the army by militias and armed groups and their supporters. But still there has been some infiltration in the army. Yes, some former officers in the army, not only Sunni officers. I mean, the idea that the army had only Sunni officers is wrong. I mean, there are quite a few Shia officers in the army too. And these have been also brought back with some Sunni officers. It's true that the majority were Sunnis because Saddam, towards the end of his reign, because of the war with Iran, tended to depend on his immediate tribe, who are Sunnis. But let me tell you one thing. The Ba'ath Party in Iraq is not a Sunni party. It was in fact founded by a Shi'i called Al-Rikabi. And the leadership of the Ba'ath Party back in 1963, for example, was mostly Shi'i. So the idea that the Ba'ath Party is an instrument somehow of Sunni domination is not true at all.
Question over here. Sorry.
Thanks, Lee. Mark Moore from the Wilson Center. Both Democratic candidates for president seem to be calling for an orderly but definite withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq. If they were to ask you for advice, what would you say to them? Well,
most Iraqis, of course, would prefer not to have any foreign troops in the country, naturally. I mean, but we have a situation where you have a state in which the security forces are not reliable. They are not dependable. And therefore, if there is an abrupt withdrawal of American troops now, I'm afraid what will happen, there will be chaos and anarchy. But Iraq won't be divided. What will happen is that we are going to have warlords with their militias dominating certain areas and fighting each other for power and resources. So my advice is that concentrate on the question of reorganizing the armed forces of the Iraqi state as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, so that they can really take over the responsibility of maintaining law and order in the country. And then, of course, the American forces can withdraw. But if they withdraw precipitously, then I think we're going to have trouble.
My name is Carl Osgood. I write for Executive Intelligence Review. Mr. Pachachi, you mentioned in your opening remarks that agricultural production has hit new lows in Iraq. As far as I understand, Iraq has been dependent on imports for a portion of its food supply for quite some decades, I think. But now that the market that it would be dependent on is itself experiencing shortages and price inflation. So I'm wondering if you could describe for us what the food situation inside Iraq is right now and what kind of discussions, if any, are there about making Iraq food self-sufficient?
You know, Iraq used to be a food exporter in the old days. Mm-hmm. And, but of course, agriculture was neglected or mismanaged, mishandled, and as a result, it became a net importer. But agriculture has been really neglected to such an extent that vast lands have been left uncared for. Just about 2 weeks ago, we had a delegation from Babel province, from northern Babel province. They said that, you know, they may have a famine, which is something impossible to understand. Iraq has 2 great rivers, fertile land, was, as I said, a food exporter. Now there is danger of famine in some areas. It shows how much mismanagement and ignorance in the way that the state is being run has brought Iraq so far down.
Further questions? Is shown here.
Al Milliken, Washington Independent Writers. How have you seen and how do you see the plight of or the ability of religious minorities to worship freely and to practice their religions?
Well, of course, the Iraqi constitution provides the full freedom for religious practice, and as far as I know, there has been, of course, officially, there has been absolutely no interference in the practice of religion. But of course, sometimes some of these militias and armed groups who act on their own and commit acts of violence sometimes do that for religious, or what they call religious reasons. But in fact, really, the main thing is to consolidate their power and even to extort money. But as far as Iraqis are concerned, you know, Iraqis have always been very tolerant when it comes to religion, and maybe they are perhaps the least of all the Arab countries, the least bigoted about religion and so on.
Maria Stella, do you see the hand up, Maria?
Dr. Pachachi, could you please talk a little about your oil situation?
Did you hear that?
Yes, the oil. Well, you know, Iraq is one of the richest oil-producing countries in the world. I mean, its reserves are perhaps the highest in the world. But of course, its production is still under 2 million barrels a day. The oil industry has been neglected. As I said in my statement, it needs modernization. It needs thorough overhaul, which of course needs a lot of money. But also we hope to have a new oil law, which would sort of organize the whole oil industry in such a way that will hopefully will lead to greater production and a better way of running the oil industry. It's very important for Iraq, as you know, because it's the mainstay of Iraq's economy, and we depend on oil more than anything else, and it's a great pity that it has been neglected. We should be able to produce between 7 to 8 million barrels a day, if really Iraq's potential is exploited.
Dr. Pachachi, you've talked about the security situation in the country being fragile, precarious. You've talked about the need to reform and get militias out of the armed forces. There has been a combat role for the United States. You have elections in 2008 sometime and 2009. And I guess the question is, over what period of time do you think the United States can move from a combat role to strictly a training role of the armed services? How long will it take?
Well, I think that really depends on the efficiency and the rapidity of reorganizing the Iraqi armed forces and the security forces. Because the more progress we make in reorganizing the armed forces and the security forces, the shorter the period for American presence would be. So, I mean, and that's why I believe that the multinational forces should play an important role in the reorganization of the armed forces to help the government, in other words. Not only the question of, which is most important, of loyalty and so on, but the Iraqi armed forces need more equipment, need better weapons, and these things have to be also addressed, because otherwise, under certain circumstances, the militias seem to be better armed than the government forces, and that, of course, is something that cannot be tolerated, because otherwise, the government won't be in a position to maintain law and order in the country.
Andrea Rue, I wonder if you could talk about personal status laws now, and whether they're still using the 1959 codes or whether they've departed significantly from them.
Well, the law still applies, the 1959 law still applies, but of course there is some ambiguity in the Constitution about how it can be put in practice, because it gives the right to an individual to apply the law of their own choosing. But the law of 1959 is still in the statute books, and of course there's going to be a fight, I think, sooner or later, between especially the women and those who support them, and the more conservative religious elements in the country. We had the same thing in the governing council, of course, and we were able to defeat an attempt to repeal the 1959 law.
Further questions? Okay, there's one in the middle. I see three hands up. We'll take those three questions and then we'll conclude.
Malcolm Byrne from the National Security Archive at George Washington University. If I could come back to Iran and the U.S. for a second, the two poles of the debate right now seem to be in this country that the United States should either unconditionally speak with Iran's leaders or engage in some sort of military action. What is your view about the best approach that the U.S. could take for the benefit of regional security?
Well, I think before taking any military action, they should exhaust all diplomatic means, in my opinion. So perhaps it would be useful to really start engaging Iran. But of course, at the same time, I think it should be absolutely clear to Iran that it can't go on negotiating and procrastinating while it continues its attempt to spread its influence in Iraq. So I mean, you can't have it both ways. If they want to negotiate seriously, they have to stop all their attempts to interfere in the affairs of Iraq. I think that should be a condition for any negotiations between the United States and Iran.
Okay, there's a question here and then on the side, and we'll conclude. Two more questions.
Dr. Adnan, I'm Shahla Wali from Iraq, and I would like to greet you in Iraq and say Allah bil khair wa ahlan wa sahlan. We are, as Iraqi, I would like to second and commend your opinion about being optimistic about our country. And we are so happy that finally we are getting back our intellectuals, technocrats, people who were known to be building other countries to be back in our country and build our country again. And I would like to also second your opinion that religious agenda actually is a very temporary phenomenon in Iraq, but we need to address it very quickly and get back to our real Iraqi potentials to rule our country in a very technocratic way. In this regard, I have a question. We all trying to hold our country together. And I think the Kurdistan region, it's also an important fact within our country. So how do you think, or what's your perception, how we get this country together and how we can be more inclusive in our political process to include everybody and trying to keep Iraq as Iraq?
Well, we certainly are trying to do that, and I thank you very much for your comments. This new front that I spoke about is precisely what you have described. This is a front which includes Iraqis from different nationalities, different creeds, different confessional affiliations, and they all really are united on certain aims. The most important aim is to keep the unity and territorial integrity of Iraq and to prevent its partitioning, and also to make sure that an Iraqi government elected by the people will address seriously all the problems and the needs and aspirations of the Iraqi people, which have been unfortunately neglected to a large extent in the last 3 years.
We'll conclude with this question.
Thank you very much. Sue Summers, the Wilson Center. Mr. Pachachi, can you comment, please, on following the very timely and dramatic trials that took place of the senior officials in Iraq, the Hussein trial and the other ones? Is there a continued interest and support among the Iraqi people for more investigation and, where deemed appropriate, prosecution of other persons responsible for the crimes that were part of the that led to the atrocities, or is it now more secondary because of the need to move forward?
Yes, my feeling now it is really secondary. I don't think the people are concerned too much about this, and because there are more pressing problems to be met and to be solved. And anyway, I think you have asked maybe the wrong person, because I am against the death penalty as a matter of principle. So I think the sooner we finish with these trials, the better for all concerned.
Dr. Pachachi is only in town for a few days, and we are very pleased indeed that he came to the Wilson Center, gave us a very frank and candid report, and has responded quite completely, I think, to the questions that have been put to him. Let's express our appreciation to Dr. Pachachi.